I called a family dinner to announce my will. My daughter-in-law smiled a little too much that evening. Then a waitress leaned close and gave me a note. Do not drink. I went pale but calmly switched our glasses, and what happened next ended her plans forever. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I never imagined that a simple family dinner would save my life. At 56, I thought I had seen everything, understood people well enough to spot their true intentions. But as I sat at the head of my mahogany dining table that Tuesday evening, watching my daughter-in-law Sandra pour wine with that strange smile of hers, I realized how wrong I had been. The crystal chandelier cast a warm glow over the room, the same room where my late wife Eleanor and I had hosted countless family gatherings. Tonight felt different, though. There was tension in the air, thick enough to cut with a knife. I had called this dinner for a specific purpose, to announce some important changes to my will. At my age, with my recent health scares, it seemed like the responsible thing to do. My son Marcus sat to my right, fidgeting with his napkin. He was 32 now, married to Sandra for 3 years, and while I loved him dearly, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in him since the wedding. He used to visit weekly, just the two of us, talking about business, sports, life. Now every visit included Sandra, and our conversations had become stilted, formal. Sandra herself was at the other end of the table, playing the perfect hostess. She was beautiful, I had to give her that. Blonde hair always perfectly styled, makeup flawless even for a family dinner. But tonight, something about her demeanor struck me as odd. She kept glancing at her watch, and every time I mentioned the will, her smile grew wider, more intense. "Dad, you really don't need to worry about all this legal stuff right now," Marcus said, cutting into his steak. "You're healthy, you've got years ahead of you." I almost laughed at the irony. Healthy? For the past 6 months, I'd been battling a series of mysterious symptoms that had doctors scratching their heads. Fatigue, nausea, moments of confusion that came and went like fog. Some days I felt like I was aging 10 years in 24 hours. "Actually, son, that's exactly why we need to discuss this," I replied, watching Sandra's reaction carefully. "These health issues I've been having, they've made me realize I need to get my affairs in order sooner rather than later." Sandra leaned forward slightly, her green eyes bright with what I initially mistook for concern. "Oh, Alan, don't say things like that. You're going to be fine. The doctors said it might just be stress, right?" She was right about what the doctors had said, but something in her tone bothered me. There was an eagerness there, barely concealed beneath her sympathetic words. I had built my construction company from nothing, learned to read people in boardrooms and job sites alike. This felt wrong. "Well, regardless," I continued, "I've been thinking about making some changes, significant changes." Sandra's hand tightened around her wine glass. "What kind of changes?" Marcus looked between us, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Dad, maybe we should talk about this another time. Sandra's been planning this dinner all week." That caught my attention. Sandra had been planning this dinner. I thought I had called it. But as I replayed the conversation from the previous weekend, I realized she had been the one to suggest the date, the menu, even the wine selection. She had orchestrated this entire evening. "No, it's fine," Sandra said quickly, that smile never leaving her face. "I think it's wonderful that Alan wants to share his plans with family. We're all here for you, whatever you decide." The way she said, "whatever you decide," sent a chill down my spine. It was too accommodating, too eager. In my experience, people who stood to benefit from decisions were never this openly supportive unless they already knew something you didn't. I excused myself to use the bathroom, needing a moment to collect my thoughts. As I walked down the hallway lined with family photos, I caught a glimpse of Sandra and Marcus through the slightly open dining room door. She was leaning close to him, whispering something urgently. I couldn't make out the words, but Marcus looked uncomfortable, almost guilty. When I returned to the table, Sandra immediately stood up. "Let me refresh your wine, Alan. You've barely touched yours." She reached for my glass before I could respond, refilling it with deliberate care. As she poured, I noticed her hands were trembling slightly. Nerves, I told myself, but something deeper nagged at me. "Thank you, dear," I said, raising the glass but not drinking. "You know, Sandra, you've been so attentive these past few months during my health troubles, bringing me soup when I felt sick, making sure I took my medications. I really appreciate everything you've done." Her smile faltered for just a moment. "Of course, Alan. Your family. I just want you to feel better." "Funny thing, though," I continued, watching her carefully. "I seem to feel worse after some of your visits. The doctors can't figure out why my symptoms come and go so unpredictably." Marcus looked confused. "Dad, what are you trying to say?" "Nothing specific, son. Just making conversation." But I wasn't making conversation. I was testing waters, and Sandra's reaction told me everything I needed to know. Her face had gone pale beneath her makeup, and she was gripping the wine bottle so tightly her knuckles were white. The rest of dinner passed in uncomfortable small talk. Sandra kept encouraging me to eat more, drink more, always with that bright smile that no longer seemed genuine. When the main course was finished, she insisted on bringing out the dessert she had prepared specially for the occasion. As she disappeared into the kitchen, Marcus leaned over. "Dad, are you feeling okay? You seem tense tonight." "I'm fine, son. Just thinking about the future, about family." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Tell me, how long has Sandra been so interested in my health? It seems like she knows more about my medical appointments than I do sometimes." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "She cares about you, Dad. Is that such a bad thing?" Before I could answer, Sandra returned with a chocolate cake that looked professionally made. "I hope you like it, Alan. I know chocolate is your favorite." She cut generous slices for everyone, but I noticed she served mine first, adding extra whipped cream without being asked. As she handed me the plate, our eyes met, and for just a second, I saw something there that made my blood run cold. It wasn't love or concern or even simple greed. It was calculation. I took a small bite of the cake, complimented her baking, and watched as both Sandra and Marcus relaxed slightly. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something crucial, something that would explain the growing sense of dread that had been building all evening. As the night wound down and they prepared to leave, Sandra hugged me goodbye, holding on just a moment longer than necessary. "Take care of yourself, Alan," she whispered in my ear. "I'd hate for anything to happen to you." The words were meant to sound caring, but as I closed the door behind them and stood alone in my suddenly too quiet house, I couldn't help but wonder if Sandra's concern for my well-being wasn't quite what it seemed. Something was very wrong, and tomorrow I was going to start finding out exactly what. The next few days passed in a blur of doubt and paranoia. I found myself analyzing every interaction I'd had with Sandra over the past months, looking for clues I might have missed. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that something was seriously wrong. I decided to take a different approach. Instead of confronting my suspicions head-on, I would observe, gather information, and most importantly, be more careful about what I ate and drank around Sandra. The thought that someone in my own family might be causing my mysterious illness was almost too terrible to contemplate, but I couldn't ignore the evidence anymore. On Friday evening, I called Marcus and suggested we all meet for dinner at Romano's, a family-owned Italian restaurant downtown that Eleanor and I used to frequent. I chose a public place deliberately. If my suspicions were correct, Sandra might be less likely to try anything with witnesses around. "Dad, you don't have to take us out," Marcus protested over the phone. "Sandra was planning to cook this weekend." "I insist," I said firmly. "My treat. Besides, I want to continue our conversation from Tuesday about the will changes. There are some details I'd like to discuss in a more relaxed setting." There was a pause, then Sandra's voice in the background asking what the call was about. I heard Marcus explain, and then Sandra's bright voice saying, "That sounds wonderful. I love Romano's." The enthusiasm in her voice made my stomach turn. Was she excited about another opportunity to— what exactly? Poison me? The thought seemed absurd even as it formed in my mind, but I couldn't shake it. Saturday evening arrived, and I made sure to get to Romano's early. I wanted to choose our table, somewhere with good visibility and near the kitchen where the staff would be frequently passing by. Old habits from my construction days: always survey the site before the important meetings. Marcus and Sandra arrived 20 minutes later. Sandra looked stunning as usual, wearing a black dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She hugged me warmly, and I found myself tensing at her touch. "You look tired, Alan," she said, studying my face with what appeared to be genuine concern. "Have you been sleeping well?" "About as well as can be expected," I replied carefully. "The symptoms come and go." We were seated at a corner table with burgundy leather banquettes. The restaurant was busy, filled with the comfortable chatter of families and couples enjoying their weekend evening. Our waitress was a young woman named Maria, who couldn't have been more than 25, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and tired eyes that suggested she was working her way through college. As we perused the menus, Sandra kept steering the conversation back to my health and my legal affairs. "So, Alan, you mentioned making changes to your will. Have you spoken with your lawyer yet?" "I have an appointment with Harold next week," I said, referring to Harold Brennan, who had been handling my legal affairs for over 15 years. "Just want to make sure everything is in order." Sandra nodded approvingly. "That's very responsible of you. Estate planning is so important, especially when someone's health is unpredictable." The way she said unpredictable bothered me. It was too casual, too knowing. When Maria came to take our drink orders, Sandra was quick to speak up. "Alan, you should try their house wine. It's supposed to be excellent." "Actually, I think I'll stick with water tonight," I said. "The medications I'm taking don't mix well with alcohol." Sandra's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course. You have to be careful." Marcus ordered a beer. Sandra chose a glass of the house red wine, and I asked for sparkling water with lemon. When Maria returned with our drinks, I noticed she seemed nervous, glancing frequently at our table even when she was serving other customers. During dinner, Sandra continued to be overly attentive, insisting I try her appetizer, offering to share her entree, constantly asking if I needed anything. Her behavior was starting to feel suffocating rather than caring. "You know what?" I said suddenly. "I think I will have a glass of wine after all, just a small one." Sandra's face lit up. "Wonderful." "Maria," she called to our waitress, "could we get another glass of the house red for my father-in-law?" Maria nodded and headed toward the bar. I watched Sandra's reactions carefully, noting how she seemed more relaxed now that I had agreed to the alcohol. When Maria returned with my wine, she set it down with slightly shaking hands. "Thank you," I said, lifting the glass. But as I brought it toward my lips, something extraordinary happened. Maria, who was clearing away our appetizer plates, leaned close to me and whispered so quietly I almost missed it. "Excuse me, sir." Then even more quietly, "Check your pocket." I froze, the wine glass halfway to my mouth. Maria had slipped something into my jacket pocket so smoothly I barely felt it. She continued clearing the table as if nothing had happened, but I caught her eye for just a moment. She gave me the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. My hand trembled slightly as I set the wine glass back down without drinking. "Actually, I think I should stick with water after all. This medication really doesn't mix well with alcohol." Sandra's expression flickered with what might have been disappointment. "Are you sure? Just a sip won't hurt." "Better safe than sorry," I said, pushing the glass away from me. The rest of dinner passed in a haze. I made conversation, laughed at appropriate times, but my mind was racing. What had Maria put in my pocket? Why had she done it, and why did I have the sudden, overwhelming instinct to trust this complete stranger over my own daughter-in-law? When we finished eating, I excused myself to use the restroom. In the privacy of the bathroom stall, I reached into my jacket pocket and found a small piece of paper folded several times. With trembling fingers, I unfolded it. The message was written in hurried handwriting. "Do not drink anything she gives you. Meet me behind the restaurant in 10 minutes. Come alone." I stared at the note, my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone in the restaurant could hear it. This confirmed my worst fears. Someone else had noticed something wrong with Sandra's behavior toward me. But who was this waitress, and how did she know? I flushed the toilet for appearances and returned to the table where Sandra and Marcus were discussing vacation plans for the upcoming summer. "Dad, you should come with us to the Hamptons," Marcus was saying. "The sea air might be good for your health." "We'll see," I said, my mind elsewhere. "I should probably get going soon. I'm feeling a bit tired." Sandra reached over and patted my hand. "Of course, Alan. You need your rest. But please, finish your wine first. You barely touched it." She was pushing the wine again. The note was right. I should not drink anything she gave me. "I really can't," I said firmly. "But thank you for a lovely evening." We paid the bill and said our goodbyes in the parking lot. I hugged Marcus genuinely, but when Sandra embraced me, I found myself wondering if this woman was trying to kill me. After they drove away, I waited 5 minutes, then walked around to the back of the restaurant. Maria was there, smoking a cigarette with shaking hands. When she saw me, she immediately stubbed it out. "Mr. Holloway," she said, "I wasn't sure you'd come." "How do you know my name?" I asked. She looked around nervously, as if making sure we were alone. "Because I know who she is," she said quietly. "Your daughter-in-law. I know what she's been doing to you." My blood turned to ice. "What do you mean?" Maria took a deep breath. "My name is Maria Santos. Sandra is my cousin." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I gripped the brick wall behind me for support. "Your cousin? She doesn't know I work here. We haven't spoken in years. But I recognized her the moment she walked in with you tonight." Maria's voice was barely above a whisper. "Mr. Holloway, you're in terrible danger." I felt like I was drowning. "Tell me everything you know." Maria glanced around again, then looked directly into my eyes. "Sandra isn't who she says she is. Her real name is Sandra Vega, and she's done this before. The man she was married to before your son, he died suddenly. Natural causes, they said. But the family suspected—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "Suspected what?" I demanded. "Suspected she poisoned him, but they could never prove it. He was older, had some health issues. It looked like a heart attack brought on by stress and age." My knees felt weak. "Why are you telling me this?" Tears started forming in Maria's eyes. "Because I can't let her do it again. I've been watching her tonight, seeing how she acts around you. It's the same pattern. She gets close to older men with money, makes them dependent on her, then—" She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent." "Do you have any proof?" I asked. Maria shook her head. "Nothing that would hold up in court. But I know Sandra. I grew up with her. She's always been calculating, always looking for the easy way to get what she wants. When I heard she had married again to someone with money—" She shuddered. How long do you think she's been doing this to me?" "Probably months," Maria said. "She's patient. She makes it look gradual, natural. Small doses of something that mimics common health problems in older men. Fatigue, confusion, nausea. Eventually it would look like a heart attack or stroke." I felt sick to my stomach, and not from any poison. My own daughter-in-law had been slowly killing me, and my son had no idea. "What should I do?" I asked. Maria reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a business card. "This is my friend's number. She's a nurse who works with poison control. She might be able to help you figure out what Sandra's been using and how to test for it." I took the card with numb fingers. "Thank you, Maria. You may have just saved my life." As I drove home that night, my mind was reeling with the implications of what I had learned. Sandra had married my son not for love, but as part of an elaborate plan to inherit my money. She had been slowly poisoning me for months, waiting for me to die so she could claim whatever inheritance came her way. But now I knew the truth. And if Sandra thought she was going to get away with murder, she was about to learn that this old construction worker was tougher than she had bargained for. The question was, What was I going to do about it? The next morning I sat in my kitchen staring at the business card Maria had given me. Nurse Jennifer Walsh, Poison Control Specialist. My hands were still shaking as I dialed her number. This was real. I was actually calling someone to find out if my daughter-in-law had been poisoning me. Jennifer answered on the third ring, her voice professional but warm. After I explained the situation, she agreed to meet me that afternoon at her office. Bring any medications you've been taking, any supplements, anything Sandra might have had access to, she instructed. I spent the morning gathering everything I could think of. The vitamins Sandra had bought for me last month, claiming they would help with my energy levels. The herbal tea she'd been bringing me when I felt nauseous, even the bottle of antacids she'd insisted I keep by my bedside. Jennifer's office was in a medical building downtown. She was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. She listened to my story without judgment, taking notes as I described my symptoms and the timeline of Sandra's increased presence in my life. The symptoms you're describing could be consistent with several different substances, she said, examining the bottles I'd brought. Arsenic is the classic choice because it's hard to detect and mimics natural illness, but there are others. Small doses of certain medications can cause similar effects. She held up the vitamin bottle Sandra had given me. Mind if I test these? 20 minutes later, she returned from her lab with a grim expression. Mr. Holloway, these vitamins have been tampered with. There are traces of digoxin, a heart medication that can be extremely dangerous in the wrong doses. Too much can cause nausea, confusion, fatigue, and eventually cardiac arrest. My worst fears were confirmed. Sandra had been poisoning me slowly, methodically, making it look like I was dying of natural causes related to age and stress. How long would this take to kill someone? I asked. Depends on the dosage and frequency. Based on what you've described, I'd say she's been giving you just enough to make you sick, maybe planning to increase the dose gradually. If you hadn't figured this out. She didn't need to finish the sentence. I thanked Jennifer and left her office feeling like I was walking through a nightmare. My phone rang as I was getting into my car. It was Marcus. Hey, Dad, Sandra wanted me to call and check on you. She said you seemed really tired last night at dinner. The irony was sickening. Sandra was checking on me to see how well her poison was working. I'm fine, son, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Just taking things easy today. Good. Oh, and Sandra mentioned she'd like to bring you some homemade soup this afternoon. She's worried you're not eating enough. More poison, delivered with a smile and a concerned expression. That's very thoughtful of her, but I'm actually feeling much better today. Maybe another time. There was a pause. Dad, Sandra's really trying, you know. I think she genuinely cares about you. If only he knew how much she cared about inheriting my money. That evening, I called Harold Brennan, my lawyer, and scheduled an emergency meeting for Monday morning. I needed to change my will immediately, but I also needed to be strategic about it. If Sandra suspected I knew what she was doing, she might accelerate her timeline or try something more direct. I spent the weekend doing research. I called Maria and asked her to meet me again. This time, she brought a friend, Detective Ray Collins, someone she'd known since high school who now worked for the police department. Maria told me about your situation, Detective Collins said as we sat in a coffee shop across town. Unfortunately, poisoning cases are incredibly difficult to prove unless we catch the person in the act or find the poison in their possession. So Sandra could just get away with this? Not necessarily, but we need evidence. Has she been in your house recently? Has she had access to your food or medications? I thought about it. She brings me meals sometimes. She knows where I keep my medications. She even has a spare key to my house. Marcus gave it to her in case of emergencies. Detective Collins exchanged a look with Maria. That's good. If she's keeping poison at your house, we might be able to find it. But we'd need a search warrant, and for that we need probable cause. What if I could get her to confess? I asked. That would work, but it's dangerous if she realizes you know. She might try something more direct, I finished. I understand. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my son, about how devastated he would be when he learned the truth about his wife. Marcus had been so happy when he married Sandra. He thought he'd found his soulmate, someone who would love and support him the way Eleanor had loved and supported me. Instead, he'd married a predator who saw him as nothing more than a means to an end. Monday morning arrived, and I met with Harold to change my will. Instead of my original plan to leave everything to Marcus, I created a new version that left the bulk of my estate to various charities, with only a small inheritance for Marcus and nothing at all for Sandra. This is quite a change from what we discussed last year, Harold noted. May I ask what prompted this decision? Family circumstances have changed, I said simply. I want to make sure my money goes to people who truly need it. Harold nodded and promised to have the new will ready for signing by the end of the week. That afternoon, Sandra called me directly for the first time in months. "Alan, I hope you don't mind me calling," she said, her voice sweet as honey. "I just wanted to check on you. Marcus said you declined my offer to bring soup yesterday." "I was feeling better," I said carefully, "but thank you for thinking of me." "Of course. You know, I've been thinking. You seem to have good days and bad days with your health. Maybe we should set up a regular schedule where I come by to check on you, make sure you're taking your medications, eating properly." The predator was circling closer. "That's very kind of you, Sandra, but I don't want to be a burden." "Oh, you're never a burden. Family takes care of family. Besides, with all these changes you're making to your will, I want to make sure you're thinking clearly and not being influenced by people who might not have your best interests at heart." A chill ran down my spine. How did she know about the will changes? I hadn't told Marcus yet. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Oh, just that sometimes when people aren't feeling well, they can make rash decisions. Promise me you'll talk to Marcus and me before making any major changes to your estate plans." She was fishing for information, trying to find out what I was planning. This confirmed what I already suspected. Sandra wasn't just trying to kill me for whatever inheritance might come her way. She was expecting a substantial payout. "Of course," I lied smoothly. "Family should be involved in these decisions." "Wonderful. I'll come by tomorrow afternoon to check on you. I'll bring some of that herbal tea you like so much." After she hung up, I sat staring at the phone. The herbal tea I liked so much. The same tea that made me feel worse every time I drank it. Sandra was planning to bring me another dose of poison, and she expected me to drink it willingly. But this time, I had a different plan. I called Detective Collins and explained Sandra's visit for the next day. He listened carefully, then outlined a strategy. "We'll have officers positioned nearby," he said. "If you can get her to reveal information about what she's been giving you, we'll have what we need for an arrest warrant." "And if she doesn't confess?" "Then we'll need to find another way. But based on what you've told me about her behavior, I think her confidence is making her careless. People like Sandra often can't resist the opportunity to gloat once they think they've won." That night, I called my son. I needed to hear his voice, maybe for the last time before his world came crashing down around him. "Hey, Dad, how are you feeling?" "Better, actually. Much better." And for the first time in months, that was true. Knowing what was wrong with me, knowing I wasn't actually dying of some mysterious illness, had given me a strength I hadn't felt in a long time. "That's great to hear. Sandra will be so relieved. She's been really worried about you." "I'm sure she has," I said, the irony lost on my son. "Marcus, I want you to know that I love you. Whatever happens, remember that everything I've ever done has been because I love you and want what's best for you." There was a pause. "Dad, you're starting to worry me. Is everything okay?" "Everything is going to be fine, son. I promise." As I hung up the phone, I realized I was about to embark on the most dangerous gamble of my life. Tomorrow I would face my would-be killer and try to get her to confess to attempted murder. If I succeeded, Sandra would be arrested, and my son would learn the horrible truth about his wife. If I failed, I might not live to see another sunset. But I was done being a victim. Sandra had picked the wrong man to try to murder, and tomorrow she was going to find out exactly what kind of fighter this old construction worker could be. The only question now was whether I was strong enough to see this through to the end. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. Knowing the truth about my illness had lifted a weight from my shoulders, but it had also filled me with a cold, calculating anger. Sandra thought she was clever, thought she had found an easy mark in a sick old man. She was about to learn how wrong she was. Detective Collins called at 9 in the morning to confirm the plan. "We'll have undercover officers positioned across the street and in the house next door. Mrs. Patterson has agreed to let us use her place. You'll be wearing a wire, and we'll be monitoring everything." What if Sandra notices something? What if she gets suspicious? "We've done this before, Mr. Holloway. The equipment is virtually undetectable. Just act natural. Let her do most of the talking and try to steer the conversation toward your health and the medications she's been giving you." An hour later, a technician arrived to fit me with the recording device. It was smaller than I'd expected, barely noticeable once it was properly positioned. They also gave me a panic button disguised as a pen that I could click if things went wrong. "Remember," Detective Collins said as they finished the setup, "we need her to admit to giving you substances that weren't prescribed by your doctor. If she confesses to adding anything to your food or medications, we'll have enough for an arrest." Sandra arrived at exactly 2 o'clock, punctual as always. She was carrying a shopping bag and wearing that bright smile that I now recognized as completely artificial. "Alan, you look so much better today," she said, kissing my cheek as she came inside. "I brought some groceries and that special tea I mentioned." "You're too kind, Sandra. You really don't need to go to all this trouble." "Nonsense, it's my pleasure. Besides, I know how much this tea helps with your stomach problems." She bustled into the kitchen, and I followed, watching as she unpacked her bag. Along with the herbal tea, she had brought some crackers, soup, and a bottle of what looked like some kind of health tonic. "What's that?" I asked, pointing to the dark bottle. "Oh, this is wonderful." Sandra's eyes lit up. "It's a natural energy supplement. I've been researching remedies for fatigue, and this came highly recommended. All natural ingredients, completely safe." "I'll bet," I thought grimly. "That's very thoughtful of you." Sandra began preparing the tea, humming softly to herself. She seemed completely at ease, confident in her routine. As the water boiled, she chatted about Marcus, about his work, about plans they were making for the future. "You know, Alan, Marcus and I have been talking about maybe starting a family soon," she said casually. "Of course, we want to make sure we're financially stable first. It's so expensive to raise children these days." "I'm sure you'll figure it out," I said, wondering if she was planning to use my inheritance to fund her family plans. "Well, we're hoping we won't have to worry about money too much longer," she said with a meaningful look. "Marcus will inherit your construction company eventually, and of course there's your life insurance and savings." There it was, the first hint of her true motivations. "You and Marcus have discussed my financial situation?" Sandra blushed prettily, as if embarrassed by her own candor. "Oh, not in detail. It's just that Marcus worries about taking care of me if anything happened to him, and naturally he assumes that if something happened to you—" She trailed off, looking appropriately sad at the thought. "Of course," I said. "It's natural for a young couple to think about these things." The tea kettle whistled, and Sandra poured the hot water over the tea bag she'd placed in my favorite mug. I watched carefully as she prepared it, looking for any additional substances she might add. She stirred in honey and a squeeze of lemon, just the way I liked it. "There you go," she said, handing me the steaming mug. "This should help you feel better." I took the mug but didn't drink immediately. "Sandra, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "You've been so attentive to my health lately, bringing me vitamins, checking on my medications, making sure I eat properly. It means a lot, but I have to wonder, where did you learn so much about caring for someone with health problems?" Sandra's smile didn't waver, but something flickered in her eyes. "Oh, I've always been interested in natural health remedies. My grandmother was very knowledgeable about herbs and traditional medicines." "Is that where you learned about the vitamins you brought me?" The ones that are supposed to help with energy? Exactly. Grandmother always said that modern medicine only treats symptoms, but natural remedies can heal the whole body. I nodded thoughtfully. You know, it's funny. I've been taking those vitamins for weeks now, but I haven't noticed much improvement. If anything, I sometimes feel worse after taking them. Sandra's hand tightened slightly around her own teacup. Well, natural remedies can take time to work, and sometimes people feel a bit worse before they feel better. It's called a healing crisis. A healing crisis? I repeated. I've never heard that term before. Oh yes, it's very common. When the body starts detoxifying, it can cause temporary symptoms, nausea, fatigue, confusion, but it means the treatment is working. I almost laughed at the audacity of it. She was describing the effects of the poison she'd been giving me and calling it a healing crisis. That's fascinating, I said. You seem to know so much about this. Have you studied it formally, or is it just a hobby? Just a personal interest, Sandra said quickly. I like to research things thoroughly before I recommend them to people I care about. I lifted the tea mug to my lips, pretending to take a sip while actually just letting the liquid touch my lips. This tea does taste different from what I usually drink. What kind is it exactly? It's a special blend, Sandra said, watching me intently. Chamomile, ginger, and a few other herbs that are good for digestion. I had it specially made at that health food store downtown. Which herbs, exactly? I pressed. I'm curious about what I'm putting in my body, especially with all the medications I'm taking. Sandra waved her hand dismissively. Oh, just natural things. Nothing that would interfere with your prescriptions. I made sure of that. But her casual dismissal only made me more suspicious. If she had really researched interactions with my medications, she would know exactly what herbs were in the tea. Sandra, I said carefully, I have to ask you something, and I hope you won't take it the wrong way. Of course, Alan. What is it? Have you ever added anything to the vitamins or tea you bring me? Anything beyond what's on the label? The question hung in the air between us. Sandra's smile faltered for just a moment, and I saw something cold flash in her eyes before the pleasant mask slipped back into place. What a strange question, she laughed, but the sound was forced. Why would I do something like that? I don't know, I said, still holding the untouched tea. It's just that my symptoms seem to get worse after I take the things you bring me, and I wondered if maybe you were adding some kind of supplement or remedy that might not be agreeing with me. Sandra stood up abruptly, moving to the sink to rinse her empty teacup. With her back to me, she said, Alan, I think you're being a bit paranoid. Maybe that's one of your symptoms. Confusion, suspicion, it's common in people with your condition. My condition? She turned back to face me, and for a moment the mask slipped completely. The sweet, caring expression was gone, replaced by something calculating and cold. Men your age with your health problems, she said slowly. It's natural for the mind to start playing tricks, making you suspicious of people who are trying to help you. There was a threat buried in those words, a subtle suggestion that my mental state was deteriorating. If I died now, Sandra could claim I had been paranoid and confused in my final days, casting doubt on anything I might have said about her. Is that your professional opinion? I asked quietly. Sandra's eyes narrowed slightly. I'm just saying that maybe you should be more grateful for the people who care about you instead of questioning their motives. And what if someone's motives weren't as pure as they seemed? I pushed. What if someone was pretending to care while actually making me sick? The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken accusations. Sandra stared at me for a long moment, and I could almost see her calculating, trying to figure out how much I knew. Finally, she smiled again, but this time it was different, sharper, more predatory. That would be terrible, wouldn't it? She said softly. If someone was betraying your trust like that, but who would do such a thing? And more importantly, who would believe such a wild accusation? The threat was clear now. She was telling me that even if I figured out what she was doing, No one would believe me. "I suppose you're right," I said, setting down the still full tea mug. "It does sound pretty far-fetched." Sandra relaxed slightly, thinking she had reasserted control over the situation. "Exactly. Now why don't you drink your tea before it gets cold? You know how much better you feel after you have it." "Actually, I'm not feeling very thirsty right now," I said. "Maybe I'll save it for later." Sandra's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Alan, the tea is most effective when it's hot. Cold herbal tea doesn't have the same therapeutic properties." "I'm sure it'll be fine," I insisted. We stared at each other for a moment, engaged in a battle of wills. Sandra wanted me to drink the tea, and I was refusing. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Finally, Sandra forced another smile. "Well, I suppose I should get going. Marcus will be home soon, and I need to start dinner." "Of course," I said, walking her to the door. "Thank you for the visit, and for the tea." "Don't forget to drink it," she said, gripping my arm just a little too tightly. "I went to a lot of trouble to make sure it was exactly what you need." As I closed the door behind her, I realized that Sandra had just as good as confessed. She had prepared something specifically for me, something she was insistent I consume, something that would give me exactly what she thought I needed. What Sandra thought I needed was to die. The question now was whether I had gotten enough on tape to convince Detective Collins to make an arrest, or whether I would need to take this dangerous game even further. Within an hour of Sandra leaving, Detective Collins and his team were at my house reviewing the recording. They gathered around a small device in my living room, listening intently to every word that had been exchanged between Sandra and me. "This is good," Detective Collins said, pausing the playback. "Her insistence that you drink the tea, her knowledge of symptoms, and especially that comment about going to a lot of trouble to make sure it was exactly what you needed. But a defense attorney could argue she was just being caring." My heart sank. "So it's not enough?" "It's circumstantial. We need something more concrete. Either we catch her with the poison itself, or we need a clearer confession." Officer Martinez, a woman in her 30s who specialized in cases involving domestic poisoning, spoke up. "Mr. Holloway, has Sandra ever mentioned anything about her past? Previous relationships, family members who died, anything that might give us a pattern?" I thought about what Maria had told me. According to her cousin, Sandra was married before. Her first husband died suddenly, natural causes supposedly, but the family suspected poisoning. Detective Collins and Officer Martinez exchanged glances. "Do you know the husband's name, when and where he died?" "I can ask Maria for more details." "Do that," Collins said. "If we can establish a pattern of suspicious deaths around Sandra, it strengthens our case significantly." That evening, I met Maria at a small diner across town. She looked nervous, constantly glancing around as if she expected Sandra to appear at any moment. "His name was Robert Vega," she told me quietly. "He died 3 years ago in Phoenix. Sandra inherited his house and about $200,000 in life insurance." "What were the circumstances?" "Heart attack, supposedly. But Robert was only 45 and in good health. His brother Miguel never believed it was natural. He said Robert had been complaining about feeling sick for weeks before he died. Nausea, fatigue, confusion. Sound familiar?" It sounded exactly like what I had been experiencing. "Did Miguel ever go to the police?" "He tried, but there was no evidence. The coroner ruled it a heart attack, and Sandra had already moved away by the time Miguel started asking questions." "Do you think Miguel would talk to the police here?" Maria nodded. "I think he'd be relieved to know someone was finally investigating Sandra. He's felt guilty for years about not being able to prove what she did to his brother." I gave Maria Detective Collins' contact information and asked her to arrange for Miguel to call him. If we could establish that Sandra had done this before, it would make our case much stronger. The next day brought an unexpected development. Marcus called me, sounding worried. "Dad, Sandra's been acting strange since her visit yesterday. She keeps asking if you seemed sick or confused when she saw you. Did something happen? I chose my words carefully. We had a nice visit. Why? What's bothering her? She's convinced that you're getting worse, that your mind is starting to go. She wants me to talk to you about maybe getting some help. You know, someone to check on you regularly. Make sure you're taking your medications properly. The pieces clicked into place. Sandra was setting up the narrative for my mental decline, preparing Marcus to believe that I was becoming senile and paranoid. If I started making accusations against her, she could dismiss them as the confused ramblings of a sick old man. I feel fine, son, I said firmly. Actually, I've been feeling better lately than I have in months. That's what worries her, Marcus said. She thinks you might be having good days and bad days, and that the bad days are getting worse. She's really concerned about you, Dad. I appreciate her concern, I said, bile rising in my throat. But I think I'm the best judge of how I'm feeling. After I hung up, I realized that Sandra was accelerating her timeline. She was worried that I was becoming suspicious, and she was laying the groundwork to discredit anything I might say about her. This meant she would probably try to finish what she started soon. Detective Collins called that afternoon with news. We spoke with Miguel Vega. He's flying in tomorrow to give a statement. Apparently, he's been collecting information about Sandra for 3 years, hoping someday he'd get the chance to see justice for his brother. What kind of information? Medical records showing Robert's symptoms, insurance documents, even some financial records that suggest Sandra had been researching Robert's assets before they married. Plus, he has photos of Sandra cleaning out Robert's medicine cabinet right after the funeral, supposedly to prevent accidents with his prescription drugs. This was exactly what we needed. A pattern of behavior, documentation, and a witness who had been suspicious from the beginning. There's more, Collins continued. We ran a background check on Sandra. Her real name is Sandra Elena Vargas, and she's been married 4 times. 2 of those husbands died under suspicious circumstances, both leaving her substantial inheritances. My blood ran cold. Sandra wasn't just a murderer. She was a serial killer who specialized in targeting older men with money. How did she meet Marcus? I asked. That's interesting. She took a job at the coffee shop near his office about 6 months before they started dating. According to the manager, she asked specifically about the schedule of customers who came in regularly. She was hunting, Mr. Holloway. She targeted your son deliberately. The thought of this predator stalking my son, studying his habits, planning her approach, made me sick with rage. Marcus thought he had fallen in love naturally, but their entire relationship had been orchestrated by Sandra from the beginning. What's our next move? I asked. We're going to set up a sting operation. Based on her pattern and what Miguel told us about Robert's final days, we think Sandra is going to try to finish this soon. She's worried you're getting suspicious and she can't afford to wait much longer. Collins outlined the plan. I would call Sandra and tell her I was feeling much worse, that I was having severe symptoms and was scared. I would ask her to come over and bring some of her medicine to help me feel better. The idea is to get her to bring a large enough dose to cause serious harm or death, Collins explained. If she thinks you're desperate and willing to take whatever she gives you, she might get careless and bring something obviously dangerous. And if she does? We'll arrest her the moment she hands it to you. With Miguel's testimony about Robert, the pattern of suspicious deaths, and evidence of her attempting to poison you, we'll have a solid case. That evening, I called Sandra. I made my voice weak and shaky, playing up the symptoms she expected to hear. Sandra, I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm feeling terrible, I said. Worse than I've felt in months. I'm scared something's really wrong. Oh, Alan. Sandra's voice was full of fake concern. What's happening? What are your symptoms? Nausea, dizziness, chest pains. I tried to call my doctor, but it's after hours. I don't know what to do. There was a pause, and I could almost hear Sandra calculating. Have you been taking the vitamins I brought you? Yes, but they don't seem to be helping. If anything, I feel worse after taking them. That's because your body is fighting the healing process, Sandra said smoothly. You need something stronger. I have a special tonic that might help. It's more concentrated than the vitamins. Could you bring it over? I'm really scared, Sandra. I feel like I might be having a heart attack or something. Of course. I'll be right there. In the meantime, try to stay calm. Don't call anyone else. We don't want to panic Marcus unnecessarily. If you're feeling better after you take the tonic, there's no need to worry him. She was making sure I would be alone and that no one else would know about her visit. Perfect. Thank you, Sandra. I don't know what I'd do without you. That's what family is for, she said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. I'll be there in 20 minutes. After I hung up, Detective Collins and his team took their positions. This time, there would be officers actually inside the house, hidden in the basement and upstairs bedroom. If Sandra brought something dangerous, they would be close enough to intervene immediately. I sat in my living room, waiting for my daughter-in-law to arrive, with what she hoped would be my final dose of medicine. My hands were steady now, my mind clear. After months of feeling weak and confused, I finally understood what was happening to me. Sandra had picked the wrong victim. She thought she was dealing with a sick, helpless old man who would be easy to manipulate and control. Instead, she was about to face a fighter who had built a construction empire from nothing and wasn't about to let some gold-digging murderer destroy his family. 23 minutes later, Sandra knocked on my door. When I opened it, she was carrying a small leather bag and wearing an expression of exaggerated concern. "Oh, Alan, you look terrible," she said, rushing inside. "I'm so glad you called me." "I've been feeling worse since you left yesterday," I said weakly. "Whatever's wrong with me, it's getting bad fast." Sandra opened her bag and pulled out a small, dark bottle with no label. "This is very concentrated," she said, unscrewing the cap. "It might taste bitter, but you need to drink all of it. It's the only thing that's going to help you now." I stared at the bottle, knowing that whatever was inside was meant to kill me. Sandra was standing in my living room, holding my death in her hands and smiling while she did it. "Are you sure this is safe?" I asked, taking the bottle from her. "Absolutely," Sandra said, her eyes bright with anticipation. "Just drink it down quickly, it works fast." I lifted the bottle to my lips and Sandra leaned forward slightly, watching intently. That's when Detective Collins and his team burst through the front and back doors simultaneously. "Police! Nobody move!" Sandra spun around, her face going white with shock. The bottle slipped from my hands and shattered on the hardwood floor, its contents spreading in a dark stain across the wood. "Sandra Vargas, you're under arrest for attempted murder," Detective Collins said, pulling out his handcuffs. Sandra's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "This is a mistake. I was trying to help him. Ask Alan. Tell them I was helping you." But as the handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists, Sandra's expression changed. The mask of concern and caring fell away completely, replaced by pure, cold hatred. "You think you've won?" she hissed at me. "But Marcus will never forgive you for this. You've destroyed his marriage, his happiness. He'll hate you for the rest of your life." "Maybe," I said quietly, "but at least he'll have a rest of his life." As they led Sandra away, I knew the hardest part was still to come. I had to tell my son that the woman he loved was a serial killer who had been planning to murder his father. But for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe freely. The poison was out of my system, and the poisoner was in custody. I was alive, and I intended to stay that way. The phone call to Marcus was the hardest conversation I'd ever had to have. I waited until the next morning after Sandra had been formally charged and the story had been confirmed by multiple sources. I needed to be absolutely certain of my facts before I destroyed my son's world. "Dad?" Marcus answered on the first ring, his voice tight with worry. "I heard Sandra didn't come home last night. Do you know where she is?" "Son, I need you to come over. We need to talk, and it needs to be in person." "Is it about Sandra? Did something happen to her?" "Just come over, Marcus, please." An hour later, Marcus sat across from me in my living room, the same room where Sandra had tried to give me what she intended to be my final dose of poison. He looked haggard, like he hadn't slept all night. "Dad, what's going on? Where's Sandra?" I took a deep breath and told him everything. I started with the dinner at Romano's, Maria's warning, the discovery of what Sandra had been putting in my vitamins and tea. I told him about Sandra's real name, her history of dead husbands, and finally about her arrest the night before. Marcus listened in stunned silence, his face growing paler with each revelation. When I finished, he sat motionless for a long moment, staring at his hands. "You're telling me," he said slowly, "that my wife is a serial killer who was trying to murder you for your money." "I'm sorry, son. I know how much this hurts." Marcus stood up abruptly and began pacing. "This is insane. Sandra loves me. She loves you too. She's been taking care of you for months." "She was poisoning me for months," I corrected gently. "Everything she did was calculated to make me sick and eventually kill me." "But why? We weren't even supposed to inherit that much. You always said you were leaving most of your money to charity." I winced. "That's what I told everyone. But my actual will left everything to you. Sandra somehow found out about the real terms." Marcus stopped pacing and stared at me. "How much are we talking about?" "About $3 million plus the business and properties." Marcus sank back into his chair, the full weight of Sandra's betrayal hitting him. "She married me for $3 million. I'm sorry, son. I wish I could have protected you from this." The next few hours were devastating. Marcus alternated between denial, anger, and a grief so profound it broke my heart to watch. He had truly loved Sandra, and learning that their entire relationship had been a lie was destroying him. "How did I not see it?" he kept asking. "How could I live with someone for 3 years and not know who she really was?" "Because she's a professional," I said. "This is what she does. She studies her targets, learns exactly what they want to hear, and becomes that person. You fell in love with an illusion that she created specifically for you." Detective Collins stopped by that afternoon to update us on the case. The contents of the bottle Sandra had brought me the night before had tested positive for a concentrated mixture of digoxin and several other cardiac medications that would have caused immediate heart failure. "She brought enough to kill 3 people, Collins said grimly. "If you had drunk even half of that bottle, you would have been dead within minutes." Miguel Vega had also provided crucial testimony. He brought medical records showing that Robert had exhibited the exact same symptoms I had been experiencing, following the same timeline and progression. "We've also been in contact with police departments in 2 other cities where Sandra's previous husbands died," Collins continued. "They're reopening those cases based on the evidence we've gathered here." "How many people do you think she's killed?" Marcus asked, his voice hollow. "We may never know for sure," Collins admitted, "but based on her pattern and the financial records we've found, we suspect at least 4 or 5 victims over the past 10 years. The thought that Sandra had been perfecting her method on other families, other sons who had lost their fathers to her greed, made me sick with rage. At least now she would never hurt anyone again. Sandra's trial took place 8 months later. I testified about my symptoms, the vitamins and tea she had given me, and the final night when she had brought the concentrated poison. Miguel testified about his brother Robert's death and Sandra's suspicious behavior afterward. The most damaging testimony came from forensic accountants who had analyzed Sandra's finances. They showed a clear pattern. She would research wealthy men, engineer meetings with them or their children, establish relationships, and then systematically poison them while positioning herself to inherit their assets. She had been married 6 times, not 4 as we initially thought. 2 husbands had divorced her before she could complete her plans, but 4 had died under suspicious circumstances. The insurance payouts and inheritances totaled over $8 million. Sandra showed no remorse throughout the trial. She maintained her innocence, claiming she was a caring woman who had been framed by paranoid men who couldn't accept a strong, independent female in their lives. She even suggested that I had poisoned myself to frame her because I disapproved of my son's marriage. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Sandra Elena Vargas was found guilty of attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and fraud. Because of the multiple victims and the premeditated nature of her crimes, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As they led her away in handcuffs, Sandra looked directly at me. There was no fake smile this time, no pretense of caring, just cold, calculating hatred. "You think you've won," she mouthed silently, "but you've destroyed your son's life." I stared back at her, unmoved. She was wrong. I hadn't destroyed Marcus's life. I had saved it, and more importantly, I had saved my own. The months following the trial were difficult for Marcus. He struggled with depression and guilt, blaming himself for not seeing Sandra's true nature. He went to therapy and gradually began to heal, but the experience had changed him fundamentally. "I don't think I'll ever trust my judgment about people again," he told me one evening as we sat on my back porch watching the sunset. "That's not necessarily a bad thing," I replied. "A little healthy skepticism never hurt anyone. Your mother used to say that people show you who they are if you pay attention. The key is learning to pay attention." "How did you know? What made you suspicious when I couldn't see it?" I thought about that question for a long time. Experience, maybe. Years of dealing with contractors who tried to cheat me, employees who stole from me, people who smiled to my face while planning to stab me in the back. But also, I think it was because Sandra wasn't trying to fool me. She was trying to kill me. It's easier to spot someone's true intentions when they're literally poisoning you. Marcus managed a small laugh. "I guess that's one way to develop good instincts about people." A year after Sandra's conviction, Marcus met someone new. Jennifer was a teacher, kind and genuine in a way that was completely different from Sandra's calculated charm. She knew about Sandra and what had happened, but she didn't let it define how she saw Marcus. "She's the real thing," Marcus told me when he brought her to dinner for the first time. "I can tell because she's not trying to impress me. She's just herself." Watching Marcus with Jennifer, seeing him slowly learn to trust again, was one of the most satisfying experiences of my life. Sandra had tried to destroy my family, but in the end, she had only made us stronger. As for me, my health improved dramatically once the poison was out of my system. The mysterious symptoms that had plagued me for months disappeared completely. I had energy again, clarity of thought, and most importantly, peace of mind. I made some changes to my will, real changes this time. I left a substantial sum to Marcus and Jennifer, enough to ensure their financial security without making them wealthy enough to attract another Sandra. The rest went to organizations that supported victims of domestic violence and financial fraud. I also set up a foundation in Eleanor's name to provide legal assistance to families who suspected their loved ones had been murdered but couldn't afford to investigate. If Miguel Vega had been able to hire a private investigator or get legal help when Robert died, Sandra might have been stopped before she got to me. 2 years after Sandra's conviction, I received a letter from a woman in Oregon whose husband had died under suspicious circumstances. She had read about Sandra's case in the news and wondered if there might be a connection. Her husband's symptoms sounded familiar, and his new wife had inherited everything. I forwarded the letter to Detective Collins, who had been promoted to lieutenant. Within 6 months, they had gathered enough evidence to charge the woman with murder. Sandra had taught them her methods, but she had also taught law enforcement how to recognize and investigate this type of crime. That case led to 3 more arrests in different states. Sandra's prosecution had opened the floodgates, giving other families the courage to come forward with their suspicions and the tools to seek justice. On a quiet Tuesday evening, almost exactly 3 years after Sandra first tried to poison me at that family dinner, I sat in my garden reading a letter from Marcus. He and Jennifer had gotten engaged, and they wanted to have the wedding at my house, in the same backyard where Eleanor and I had hosted so many happy gatherings. "I want to start our marriage in a place where love won and evil lost," Marcus had written. "I want Jennifer to see that our family knows how to fight for what matters." As I folded the letter and looked out over the garden Eleanor had planted 20 years ago, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Sandra had tried to take everything from me, my life, my son, my legacy. Instead, she had lost everything herself and given me something I hadn't expected. the absolute certainty that I was strong enough to protect the people I loved. The wedding was beautiful. Marcus and Jennifer exchanged vows under the old oak tree where Eleanor and I had once dreamed about watching our grandchildren play. There were no secrets between them, no hidden agendas, just two people who had chosen to build a life together based on truth and trust. During the reception, Detective Collins, now retired, pulled me aside. "You know," he said, "Sandra's conviction led to changes in how we investigate suspicious deaths. There's a whole new protocol now for cases involving older men who die suddenly after marrying younger women. They call it the Vargas Protocol." "Good," I said, watching Marcus dance with his new wife. "Maybe that will save some other family from going through what we went through." As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, I stood alone in my backyard, surrounded by the remnants of the celebration. Fairy lights twinkled in the darkness, and somewhere in the distance I could hear the sound of laughter as Marcus and Jennifer drove away to start their honeymoon. Sandra was in prison, where she would spend the rest of her life. My son was married to a woman who loved him for who he was, not what he might inherit. And I was alive, healthy, and surrounded by the family I had fought so hard to protect. Justice hadn't been swift and it hadn't been easy, but it had been thorough and it had been final. For the first time in years, I slept peacefully through the night, knowing that the people I loved were safe, and that sometimes, when good people refuse to give up, the right side really does win.